Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. You know, we live amidst chaos, and I've always thought that I had a fairly good handle on making sense from chaos. It's kind of one of those things that I tell people when they ask me about my talents or my strengths. I make sense out of chaos. Sounds like a really good resume filler. But the truth is, I may have been looking at this all wrong, because I've been thinking that chaos is disarray. And I'm trying to get from there to a state of order. But really, as my guest today will tell you, chaos is not a lack of order. It's the presence of more than one order. Try to wrap your head around that for a second. It's the presence of more than one order. And in today's world, that's probably more palpable than ever. So how can you thrive amidst that chaos? The key is reinvention. We've talked about reinvention a lot on the show, but my guest today has written an amazing book to help us really get into the depths of reinvention. She's been called the Queen of Reinvention, a reinvention guru. She's an educator, a TED talker, an entrepreneur, advisor. She's the founder and Chief Reinvention Officer of the Reinvention Academy. She's the author of the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. Let's get into reinvention with the incredible Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva. Dr. Nadya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dan. And Nadya is perfectly fun.
We're going with Nadya then. Okay,
yes.
Fantastic. And I was just I was remarking with a friend of mine, because I'd just been like kind of saying, I'm excited about the guest I'm going to have today on the show, and I was saying Nadya Zhexembayeva, and they're like, how does that roll off your tongue? How do you know how to pronounce your name? I said, well, I don't really know if I'm right. So am I right? Is that correct?
You're very close. The only thing that is different is the first letter, Zhe.
Yeah, Zhexembayeva, right?
Perfect.
But I thought
it
that
does roll. Look, it just comes out of you. So thank you so much.
I will be perfectly candid. I practiced.
Thank you.
And
Me too.
But it's fantastic. And I'm so glad you're on the show. And look, apart from all the great work you're doing with reinvention, almost establishing a profession, as we were talking before about, like a standard profession of reinvention officers, and we'll get into that in a little while. You have a fantastic and incredible story to tell, a tragic story in some ways, that led you to where you are today. So I'd like to start there. And, why don't you kind of go through like what got you to this whole idea of reinvention? How did this become so important to you? And where are we going from there?
Well, I appreciate the question because it's directly connected to my last name. And there's not a week that goes by that somebody in the media profession or in branding profession approaches me to suggest that I should change my last name. I've lived in Western world and spent my life in the English-speaking world since '98. And naturally, my last name is not exactly US friendly. Let's put it that way. So naturally, many people come to me and say, you should shorten it. You should take some sort of alias of a more brand sounding like option. But it would be a loss to me that would be incomparable to any gain I can have. Zhexembayeva is a lineage name, and it is a name of my great-grandfather, his first name. I come from a nomadic minority Asian culture, Kazakhstan, and in our culture, your last name is a name of your father. And that stopped when the Soviet Union took over, and he was executed for what he stood for being a vocal opponent of the atrocities that were happening in the Soviet Union, specifically in Kazakhstan in late 1920s and early 1930s, where 40% of the Kazakh population was killed in an artificially designed famine, an absolute genocide story. And 40% of the country gone. My great-grandfather was vocal, spoke against it, arrested, tried as an enemy of the state, executed. And my grandfather at the age of 14 was forcibly removed from his land and moved to an orphanage to Russia, deep into the roots of Russia, to learn the language and to be culturally acclimated, re-educated as they
Indoctrinated.
indoctrinated and re-educated as they're positioned at some countries now. And he grew up, again, rather vocal, a journalist, and has been arrested many times for his positions until he killed himself before I was born. So that name represents for me the perseverance and resilience and the reinvention capacity of people who had absolutely no reason to keep going, but they still did. And while my great-grandfather and my grandfather never seen what was the fruit of their perseverance and resilience and reinvention, I see it now in my 18-year-old daughter, who is walking the world and making possibilities happen because they had enough stamina and enough strength inside them to keep going. I sometimes wonder if I would stay or I would kill myself long before I had children, because there was absolutely no evidence that he would ever see anything good in his life, which indeed happened. He never had anything really good happen in his life, other than the birth of his children. But in those circumstances, sometimes you wonder if that was even experienced as something positive. So my story of reinvention started long before I was born. I was raised into this family. I was born into this family. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was a wake-up call to how fragile our systems are. So when I got a chance to enter a PhD program, large system survival was my topic. And I wanted to understand specifically what makes a system sustainable and able to survive and thrive in any kind of turbulence. And why some systems, whether it's our families, our teams, our companies, our products, our communities, our countries, why some of them are able to stay and persevere and some are dying off like crazy, as we see right now with companies all around us. And the difference turned out to be reinvention. That if you reinvent, you are able to survive any storm. And if you don't, you will be out quite quickly.
That goes for people and companies and countries and systems all up and down the line?
Absolutely. It's very fractal. So it goes for a human career, especially now when we are looking at certain projections. Financial Times recently was penning an article on the projection that a typical 21st century youngster will have 5 careers. Not 5 jobs, 5 careers. That means I am a dentist now, and then I'll become a coder, and then I'll become I don't know what profession that doesn't exist right now. And within each of our careers, we'll have many, many jobs. So 5 careers, that's a kind of reinvention pace. That's a kind of criteria of what it means to be a professional. Because if you think about it, professionals of the 20th centuries were the ones who were consistent, who stick with one deep, narrow expertise. And currently, that would be cross-functional now. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of flies in the face of the like the Gladwell 10,000 hours of expertise kind of thinking out there, where you have to be, entirely focused in one thing and 10,000 hours is a long time. If anybody wants to count, it's years and years. So how can you still become an expert or be an expert if you're reinventing yourself? Maybe we're going off the path a little bit here, but
No, I love that question. It's not that you don't need 10,000 hours. It's just what are you investing those 10,000 hours in? I'll give you a pragmatic example. Accounting. Just 20 years ago, a typical accountant would need 10,000 hours around the practices of accounting. Today, most of accounting jobs are killed off by software. I don't know about you, but I'm running my business with almost no accountants present. Between the different software systems I'm using for payroll versus taxes, I have barely less than one full person who is outsourced. So, and that is a trend that keeps accelerating. So even less accounting jobs will be necessary. But the same person would need 10,000 hours in reinvention, because that is a very pragmatic set of tools and skills. And just like any other skill, you need hours and hours and hours of practice. So things around problem solving and critical thinking. We have identified in our research 7 pillars of reinvention, but at this point, I just want to highlight 3 of them that are most crucial, that are starting point for everything. It's 3 disciplines: anticipating change, designing change, and implementing change. You would need 10,000 hours of anticipating change, designing change, and implementing change. From tiny little things, anticipating the changes in the way the parking garage works in your district, to very complex skills of anticipating the fact that your entire profession will disappear within a year or 2, and you need to start preparing for a different profession. So it is still about repetition, but we're now investing in a different type of professionalism.
That makes sense to me. So it's not 10,000 hours. I mean, obviously, I think part of that was referring to, why is a professional golfer such a great golfer? Because, there's 10,000 hours of golf swings. That's one thing. But in a career, I've been in communications for the last 20 some odd years. I guess if you add it all up, I've probably got a couple of thousand hours in the whole field. But I never really focused in on saying, okay, I'm going to get my X number of hours in this or whatever. I just been in the same sort of general milieu for the last 25 years. But it's funny because I never really thought of it until the last 10 years, maybe, as, okay, this is what I'm doing now. Right. And even within that, though, I find myself like leaning towards doing just different things every couple of years, just figuring things out. And it's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you and why your book spoke to me and at deep levels. But anyway, I didn't want to derail too much. We were talking, that's the human side of it, right? So a person will have 5 careers, actually that reminds me then of another point is something that an earlier guest of mine, Dr. Michael Netzley, we spoke about about neuroscience and the long-livedness of people, the aging society, and how aging is much different now than it was before. And as you get older, the conventional wisdom is you get to be in your 50s and 60s and you start to kind of wind it down, and you're not as spry or you're not as quick thinking as a 20 or 30-year-old, when in fact, it's very, very different. The reality is very different. You just think in different ways. And as you get older, you actually become more of a strategic expert, more of a chess player, as it were.
Absolutely.
Less of a transactional person, but more of a chess player. So the point is, though, that if you are stuck or doing one career, it's one thing if you're going to retire at 62, right? But it's an entirely different thing if you're going to 82.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty important. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the skills you are learning, where your 10,000 hours go, is learning to unlearn and relearn, right? And unlearning is so hard. It's hard not only from the point of view of psychology, it's very hard from the point of view of biology. We're talking about literal structures, physical structures of our brain that have to be physically reshaped. So unlearning is a skill, and we can become experts at that skill if we invest the time to do so.
Okay, so we have to become experts at unlearning. So, I think I've probably unlearned a few things here and there, and I don't, probably inadvertently so, but that's the human side. Okay, then you were talking about there were
teams, products, processes, companies, countries. It's very fractal. So I'll give you a statistic for a typical business model, because we run surveys every 2 years. We're just starting our 2022 survey, but 2020 survey was very conclusive. The 60% of respondents across every industry size and type of a company across every country in the world, we have quite a nice sample that is pretty diverse. 60% of respondents reported that they're reinventing every 3 years or less to survive. Every 3 years or less. That's the speed of business model reinvention necessary right now. So here, maybe before you were a company that was selling cars, and now you are selling and leasing. And in 3 years, you are selling, leasing, and doing car share business. And then in 3 years, you are not selling or leasing or car sharing, you delivering mobility as a subscription. And on and on and on. So this is what we're talking about. The physical car may be exactly the same, but your business model around it changes very, very quickly. And sometimes you do need a business product reinvention. Sometimes it's just a process reinvention or a business model reinvention or payment or revenue systems reinvention. But it goes quite substantially and consistently present need to reinvent across all industries. There are some industries where cycles are a little bit longer. I was talking, of course, about median numbers. So there are some industries with much heavier investment cycle, including mining and metals, including manufacturing, where cycles are slightly longer. But I have not seen a successful company with cycles longer than 10 years, which is just unimaginable speed of change even 20, 30 years ago.
It used to be 75
Yes.
years, I think, right? I think I'm recalling that from your book, but then it's just kept compressing.
And there are many factors why. There is, of course, technological upgrades. So we are accumulating, those of you who are following the work of Singularity University, that is absolutely great. That speaks about exponential curves and that we're entering the exponential age where we accumulated so much knowledge that suddenly that slow accumulation of knowledge is turning into exponential curve where we are shooting up in the presence of resources and opportunities. The part of it is geopolitics and globalization. So if before you were competing with 5 people in your neck of the woods, now you're competing with the whole world. Part of it is democracy in knowledge and finance. So if before knowledge was a privy to very, very small number of people and literacy was not there even 100 years ago, now you can Google up pretty much any idea and open source innovation is everywhere. But equally important, access to money. If before you could get finance to finance your idea in very small number of channels, currently from all of us becoming investors with an app like Robinhood to crowdfunding and crowdsourcing to just abundance of investors of different kind, we are living in a democracy of finance, which means many more people are trying new things and you are forced to either catch up with them or be crushed by them.
I'm writing furiously because the things that you're saying, some of this is in the book, some of it is just, I'm really fascinated, captivated by what you're saying. And I keep thinking about how this kind of boils down to it, like on a personal level, where if you're not changing every so often, you're going to be left behind, and you scale that up, as you said, and it's fractal. So it scales up from the person all the way up to the company and the system and the country, I suppose, right? I mean, I don't cover politics on this show necessarily, but it's fascinating to see that if change doesn't happen in certain ways, then you're going to be left behind.
Or you will collapse the way my country did. So I actually saw the case of how you wake up and your currency doesn't exist anymore. Our country had no currency for almost 3 years. We didn't have the skills for setting up our national banking system. So we lived with other countries' currency. And we were the last to declare independence because we were so unprepared and so surprised by the collapse. So the things that you think are unshakable, are unmovable, for me, that was a very, very visceral experience of how fragile all of this is.
And that was just before you came over here, right? I mean...
Yeah, that was a very important experience for me. Because once you survive that, people ask me, how did you come here with almost no English? I'm like, if you've seen what we've just done, this is like child's play. This is okay. No problem. But it was a very formative experience for other reasons too. And I speak about it in some of the TEDx talks and so on. One of them is I truly believed people would rejoice. I mean, we did not have the best of 70 years before that. I live in Kazakhstan. This is a place where almost every gulag of Soviet Union, not all, but a huge number of them, were placed because, 40% of the people were killed off. So we had tons of free space. We're 9th largest country in the world by territory. So we have tons of free space and people killed. So great place to put concentration camps. And you can still visit them. You can visit not just the concentration camp, you can visit, we have a very famous concentration camp that is turned into a museum that was specifically for wives and children of enemies of the state. So not only you would
Oh
be
my.
imprisoned if you are at the enemy of the state, but your family would be in prison, including children, and you can see what was going on there. So not exactly the best thing to be attached to, but we had a massive number of people who committed suicide after the collapse, not for financial reasons, not for any other reasons, but the fear of the unknown and resistance to change was so great. And while the past was horrible, but it was at least certain. And it was my big wake up call of how attached we are to things, even if they're miserable and horrible in every situation. There is this thing about resistance to change that I could see with my own eyes and understand and respect in a different way, understand and honor and find a way to work with it instead of trying to swat it away or pretend it can be just overcome. No, it's very deeply rooted. It's a very serious challenge, and it needs to be respected as a type of energy or as a resource whenever you're trying to reinvent your company.
It seems quite frivolous to move from a gulag for wives and children to what you're doing in your company. There's a part of me that feels like a little pang of guilt shifting conversation in that direction. But I see you're smiling. My listeners, of course, can't see you. But like, obviously, it's those formative experiences and those kind of crucibles that you go through that then, you can then take and apply to all different walks of your life and your business. Now you've taken that and you've basically built a science around reinvention.
Oh, it happened by accident. So I did my doctorate, and one of the elements that came about in early 2000s was the movement around the question of sustainability. How do we sustain at any level of a system? And most people think sustainability has something to do with saving the forest and the monkeys and something else. It's a much deeper question that is very, very integral in nature. So it touches everything. It's about how do we sustain and preserve systems that sustain us, including, of course, financial systems, political systems, yes, natural resource systems, including water, air, stable climate, and many other resources. But it's a very comprehensive science. So I was super happy as a Coca-Cola chaired professor of sustainability, a big honor. I wrote books, I was a scientist, I was teaching in an executive education setting. And suddenly I have a very wonderful class in 2007, executive MBA, and there is a president of a pretty large agricultural company in my class. And at the end of the course on leadership, he gets his hands up, and he says, "What you say is so, well spoken that I almost believe you. The problem is you've never worked in business. So it's nice, blah, blah, but I dare you to come work inside the company, and I'm happy to be the first one for you." So in 2007, we started a consulting business that was unusual for many different reasons, called a Reinvention Agency. One of the reasons is because we are performance driven. So we stay with you until the end. We're not there to come and advise you. We're there to roll up the sleeves and make sure that every time we need to pivot, we pivot, but we see it through the end. And with this challenge came a few years, quite a few, almost 10 years of intense work in the field with many different companies until I think it was 7 years into it, where we couldn't take on more clients. There were so many companies facing potential collapse or already in the middle of a crisis that we simply could not take anymore. Even though we had more than 100 consulting subcontracting companies with us, we still couldn't take anything else. So again, it was a client who said, "You need something new." And he said, "If you cannot send more people to us, teach us." And we're like, "Teach us? What do we teach you?" And he's like, "You're doing this for decades. There's a method. Maybe you have not taken time to write it down, but there is a method." So we started with some early research trying to make sense, not only of our own cases, but also of cases around us. And that's when the 2015 TEDx talk happened on the short and long cycles. That's where we started writing manifestos around Chief Reinvention Officer as a new profession and Ministry of Reinvention or Ministers of Reinvention in a government level. And suddenly there was this massive community around us that was testing ideas, bringing them to their organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, and also public sector. And then also scientists who started helping us develop this field. So I'm super honored to share that this year, the passing year, 2021, was the birth of the Global Alliance of Reinvention Professionals, because the role of Chief Reinvention Officer as an integrative role responsible for sustaining and preserving the life of the company or the product line or the system is growing as a role. And we see more and more companies taking on that role or taking reinvention as a skill set, whatever the role their name is. It can be Chief Transformation Officer. In some companies, it's Chief Revenue Officer. In some companies, it's Chief Growth Officer. Whatever is the name is irrelevant, but the philosophy of permanent, proactive reinvention that is treated as a process, not as a one-time project, that philosophy is settling into this integrative profession. Just like finance was an integration of many streams of discipline. If you think about accounting, if you think about treasury, the idea of creating currencies and working with finance and currencies, financial controlling, many elements of finance were developed through centuries and then were integrated into one field. The same way, the different disciplines that we integrate are strategy, foresight, design thinking and innovation, Scrum, Agile, change management, organizational development, and leadership. Those are some of the key disciplines that we bring together and create a platform and a unified framework where each one of them plugs in with a perfect place to help the system renew on time before it's killed by its market or a new regulation or COVID-19.
Wow. We'll get to that last one in a moment, I'm sure. But all these disciplines kind of coming together to focus in this area of reinvention, transformation, growth, whatever the name may be, strategy, design thinking. You've just described 80% of my podcast guests. Like, these are the kinds of people that I like to talk to and have on. So I couldn't find the thread to keep everybody together. Maybe that's it. Maybe you're helping me find my thread. It's about people who are reinventing. But one thing that occurred to me as you were speaking, and it's probably something that came out of your book as well, you're talking about reinvention as a process and about, companies, organizations are, getting on the train here with where they're recognizing the need for this as a function, recognizing the need to continue to do this. You even said, I think even you posted, might have been today on LinkedIn, that 33% of companies are going to be dead in 5 years or something like that.
That was a prediction by Boston Consulting Group in January 2020, before COVID hit.
And it's got to be more than that then. So, I mean, obviously if you include...
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, if you include the kind of black swan that's been happening, right? But what I wonder is companies or, people who are working inside organizations and strategy might say, okay, yeah, we innovate a lot. Like we innovate we have an innovation department or we have an innovation team. What's the grade change or the difference that has to happen to move from that innovation mindset to a reinvention mindset? And are they similar?
When we started doing our research and looking at every different form of renewal that is necessary, we discovered that you need to think as a portfolio. The same way you think about investment portfolio, your reinvention portfolio should be diversified. And of course, you need radical innovation or mid-level innovation, what would be considered an innovation bucket. But you also need things like continuous improvement, the good old Japanese, and I know your experience in Japan, they are masters of incremental improvement.
Kaizen
And incremental improvement would never be in the innovation bucket. But it's a crucial part of your portfolio. So we discovered 9 different forms of reinvention. That includes, of course, innovation, of course, includes continuous improvement and everything in between. And you need to have a healthy, diversified portfolio because betting on just one thing is not enough. And the moment you start thinking of it as a portfolio, you start understanding that like a good investment portfolio, your reinvention portfolio has to be well managed by professionals who put it on a professional rails. This is not something you can do on a weekend once in a blue moon. This has to be a well thought out system with a really good time and monetary investment. And it cannot be done as a additional hobby for an executive who is busy with whatever their main responsibilities are. So what's missing between all this wonderful discipline is a linkages, it's a bridges and an integration. My experience, I don't know what's your experience working in so many wonderful companies as you worked. My experience, whenever I had the chance to either consult or for 3 years, I actually held the job as head of transformation for mining business. When I remember that time, strategic people usually make fun of all of those feel-good change management leadership people, or communications, not to, I'm making sense, not to offend you, but
hey, guilty as charged.
Internal communications, we are the kings as strategy and the innovation, and we are the sexy ones, and those are, they service us. And the other way around, change management people occasionally showed real disdain for finance, for core strategy and economics, respect for business modeling. The design thinking keeps saying that they're just on their own plane, living in their own world. Scrum Agile almost became a cult. And suddenly we're in these separate camps that are not working with each other. And therefore, all the efforts to renew the business on time are completely disjointed. So it's almost like, and there's many wonderful authors who've been writing about it for years, we are just taking the work and honoring each of the authors, but creating pragmatic systems of how to do that, which is we need to run the business for today while building the business for tomorrow. And it is two different types of activities. They require two different types of motivation systems, performance systems, organization and processes, type of mindsets, thinking fast and slow. It comes to mind immediately. You need very different things happening while you're running the business for today, milking the cow that is essentially going to die off soon, while building the new pastures. That is the essence of reinvention as a new science.
Well, any function should grasp this like almost innately. You have your planning season, which there's arguments to be made about how to go about planning properly. I'm leaning towards the 30-day to 90-day plan is about as good as you can get, and then shit's going to happen, and then you have to replan again. But anyway, you have your planning, your strategic plan for the year, or your tactical plan for the year. And then you have like all the things you need to do to keep the lights on.
Yes.
Right? All your basic stuff that's really what you're getting paid for. Is it on a day-to-day basis? All right, I got to make sure that this happens, these people are served, and these phone calls are made, and whatever, that list, the checklist stuff. So you have to be able to bifurcate your thinking, especially as a leader of a team or of an organization, if you want to manage that process or make that work. Now, I suppose, and going back to that word you used, it's fractal. It scales up, and I guess the larger it scales, the easier it is for it to fail.
Sometimes. So we also notice that there is at least 3 different models companies have used successfully to organize their reinvention and renewal process. And one of them is to put a kind of satellite organization next to the main operation. Sometimes it's done through the corporate venture capital fund. Sometimes it's done through an innovation lab. Sometimes it's a separate legally owned entity, especially in those industries that are heavily regulated, banking, wherever there's a physical harm situation, like heavy production, where there's explosives, that would be mining, or pharma, heavily regulated. Thank you. We appreciate that what goes inside our body is heavily regulated. That's no problem there. But any heavily regulated industry, many companies tend to create a satellite reinvention entity where the renewal happens, and it helps the main company focus on today while the satellite business is constantly creating the renewal. And our job as reinvention professionals is to bridge create a sufficiently healthy bridge between the two. So whenever the idea is ready to become operational, it's shifted to the operational form. Other companies embed it. Other companies bring it as a function. So we see more and more companies with Chief Reinvention Officer function. I was just talking to a great friend of mine. We've known each other many, many years now, 15, 16 years. and he is a part owner of a $250 million company, just took a role of Chief Reinvention Officer. He is a CEO of the company in all terms, but he said, I'm not going to call myself a CEO because I'm not operationally running the business. My main job is to look forward. I am a Chief Reinvention Officer through and through. So some are creating a function and separating. So he has a separate person who runs daily operations and separating it from the Chief Reinvention Officer role. And I have a few people to report who just done that. And it's becoming a different type of models. And some companies just embed it at the level of processes. So it's not a organizational design embeddedness, but process embeddedness. So it's part of their budgeting process, quarterly or monthly. It's part of their training and development. It's part of their employee acquisition, retention, and onboarding. It's part of every process that is crucial for them.
That seems to be a fairly common one, at least instinctively. It seems that's probably happening a lot. It feels like, we all have to wear inside companies, like we have to wear these different hats, and we have to think forward and think presently at the same time, and trying to work out what that future vision is while focusing on the present delivery. So it would be helpful, I guess, to look at these different models and figure out the best ways forward. I mean, it just makes you think, like, where do you get started with all this stuff? First of all, I guess there shouldn't be a question like, do I need to reinvent? Because the answer is clearly yes. Every so often, we have to reinvent ourselves all the time. So it's a matter of, I guess, coming to the realization or the mindset that you need to be focusing on reinvention all the time.
I have a universal recipe. Now that we run it across literally over 6,000 companies, I have a universal principle of where you start, and you don't need to pay any money for the secret, and you don't need much time. And you can apply it today at your dinner table with your family or friends, or you can apply it in your team at the next meeting you have a chance. I actually run this exercise routinely, and it can take short time, or you can design an experience for half a day or a day around it. Once you share the news and the statistics around the cycles, and I just remind you, the median cycle in the 20th century for a typical business model was 75 years. You could milk the same cow for 75 years on average. And today, the median cycle is around 6, but 60% of companies are actually reporting 3 years or less. So this is what you're talking about. Let's simplify and make it less scary. So you needed to reinvent every 50 to 70 years, and now you need to reinvent every 3 to 6 years. Put it on two sides of a piece of paper and just have a debate around the table. What were the rules of the game in the long cycles? And what are the new rules of the game today? You will have the most amazing conversation. You will develop your own rules for your own company and for your own industry, for your own career, for your own family. You will connect across generations. And by the way, those of you who have teenage kids, my daughter is deciding on college right now, and she's freaking out that she needs to make a decision for life. And I'm like, kiddo, you need to make a decision for one of your 5 careers. Relax. At tops, you're deciding for 5 to 7 years of your life. It doesn't go well, you will move on to the next one, you will reinvent. Stop it. It's not a life-changing decision. So in that sense, have a conversation and you will immediately see some patterns. So make it more granular. You can create more categories. So what is a rule of the game with a product in long cycles versus short cycles? And in the past, product was launched through perfection, for example. And now time to market beats perfection almost all of the time. You will take an imperfect product and minimal viable product to the market and still win, even if it's crappy, compared to polishing it for another half a year or year and be like tens to the market. Nobody cares. So there are many different rules of success. We just talked about narrow specialization, narrow focus on your expertise versus cross-functional knowledge. That's another rule. Rules around finance, for example, in long cycles, being comfortable with loans is great because your life is predictable, your company's life is predictable, your cash flow is predictable. So it's fine to have a high level of debt because you know exactly how you're going to pay it. In short cycles, when things are super volatile, relying super heavily on debt can mean that you might be as healthy as they come. and your company is great and your product is great, but what will kill you is a cash flow problem. And once you are not able to cover that loan, your beautiful business will be repossessed from you. So there are many, many new rules, and you will develop your own rules if you just invest some time into it. So just a piece of paper, if you want to put it on a wall with your team, do a big deep dive on the rules on the long cycles and then rules for the short cycles. And you will get specific actionable steps immediately for your company, what needs to change right now.
So I've written that down, and sounds like something I would love to do with my team, especially when we talk about not necessarily my company, but our chosen profession or our functional area, how it has changed so much. And, if you're not on the bleeding edge of that change, you can't, not only are you not going to survive within the profession, I mean, you're going to be canceled out. Your skills are going to become obsolete. That's a pretty obvious thing, but you're also not going to be able to serve anyone. And if you can't serve, and if you're in a service function, it's not going to work. But yet, moving from, one of the things is, I think for us, moving from the idea of service to contribution. So, you used to be a service organization. Now you're an organization that actually can contribute to, whatever the business wants to happen based on communicating with audiences, because the audiences are more empowered than ever before and continue to get more empowered to make decisions that impact the company versus 75 years ago when it was just like the company decides something, puts out an advertisement, and just, that's it.
Yeah.
You buy it or you don't, those simpler days.
Your profession, in terms of the importance, has grown significantly when we talk about short cycles.
Yeah.
Because short cycles means constantly new environment and constantly new competition for attention.
Yeah.
In the past, in long cycles, there was no competition for attention. There were a few players who were doing the same thing for 50 years. So how much competition for attention is there? Almost nothing. It's pretty much the same old for a very long time. You are now becoming much more crucial in terms of the different types of currencies that keep the company alive. In the past, finance was the hardest. We can see immediately right now that information flow, trust, loyalty of a different kind, loyalty to the idea, not necessarily to the company, or just paying attention, just a respect and response and presence to pay attention to your message. That became a much more rare resource than the finance or many other things that we used to consider the most difficult resource. You can have all the money in the world and still kill the company because you're not able to navigate internal or external opinion. And you can see right now with the Great Resignation and masses of people leaving their companies, internal communication becomes a critical success factor as well.
Well, you don't have to sell me on that point. I've seen so much of that. I've had my own transformation, and we could talk about the various. My approach to reinvention, even before discovering you in your book, is just something that I thought was just something had to happen. I always felt like I would get to a point where I was at a breaking point, or I felt like, I called it like a snake skin. You get to the point where the skin is so tight and you just got to get out of it and just shed that skin and do something new. But you're still the snake. Terrible analogy, I know, really. The metaphor is bad, but you're still that same, creature. You just have a newer and better and larger, probably remit and skin. But I was thinking about this, the idea of, oh gosh, where was I? Jeez.
You were saying that you've seen it in your own profession, that you yourself had to shed a lot of past.
Right.
And how noticeable it was for your own career to see the change that is coming. But we were talking about 75 versus 6 and the exercise you can take to your team.
Yeah, and I'm happy. I'm going to be. I will take that all to my team for sure, and to the company that I'm working for. And I just think that there's a fundamental need to change the mindset around this. Look, I remember where I was going for. Was over to this idea of these last couple of years, and we're talking about reinventing yourself, reinventing your company, new business models. We're talking about a very broad range, and the 75-year cycle versus the 6-year cycle. I would argue now that it's a 6-month cycle almost. Anything these last couple of years have taught us, and at the time that we're recording this, I mean, hopefully it's pretty much in our rear view. By the time this episode airs, we should certainly be in a better place. But everybody who's been through the last 2 years has been through trauma of one kind or another. Some of us have been extremely fortunate to be able to reinvent the way that we do our work, the way that we approach our lives in some ways. And some of us have had to do it several times because it didn't work the first 4 or 5 times, right? But we can afford that. Some people, though, sadly, really are stuck and can't make that choice for themselves. And a lot depends on geography, location, country, company. Like there's so many variables. But I mean, I'm fortunate to have been one of these people who could deal with it. But like this trauma for the last couple of years has really pointed out and highlighted the concept of resilience. And where I wanted to go with this was to ask you about resilience and reinvention, because clearly growing up in Kazakhstan through the tragedies of your family and your youth, going beyond that and leaving and moving to the States, and then going through your own life and having your own problems and solutions and triumphs, tragedies, I'm sure, how intertwined is resilience with reinvention?
Oh, it's completely intertwined. Resilience is such a central pillar of the reinvention mindset. It's one of the key things around understanding that we are born to reinvent. That when the baby starts crawling, if there is no tragic health circumstance, a baby doesn't need a bonus to start walking. This is what we do naturally. We try new things naturally. We are wired to upgrade ourselves and to renew ourselves. We're just educated out of it pretty early, mainly because our education system is behind and it was created for long cycles. So one of the exercises you can do as you are debating 17.5 versus 6 is, what skills do I need? What skills were rewarded in the long cycles, including knowing all the answers, but not knowing how to ask the right question? Because notice, no matter what system you grew up, socialist, capitalist, communist like myself, we all learn the same thing on the first day of school. Sit down and shut up. That's very universal language.
That's true.
So whatever religion you're part of, sit down and shut up. This was not a way to control ourselves or our kids. It was just a natural way to adapt them to long cycles, because they wouldn't need to be mobile in long cycles. They wouldn't need to be inventive in long cycles. They wouldn't need to shake the boat on a regular basis in long cycles. They need to do their job and again for 40 years and then retire. So that's what they were educated for. And for us, resilience is such an essential element. You cannot reinvent before you shake off, and get yourself back in order. Biologically, it's impossible. And we spend quite a lot of, I'm making noise, sorry. This is me hitting my table here.
You're so animated. It's an emotional topic.
Yes, I am. I get excited. Yeah, I'm just looking at for example, the bookshelf right here. There's half of the books on the shelf on the biology of trauma, and half of them are on neuroplasticity, including, for example, a wonderful book by Leonard Mladinov, Elastic: Unlocking Your Brain's Ability to Embrace Change. This is one of the things that I bring to Reinvention Academy on a regular basis, is biology of your brain. You need to understand and be able to rewire your brain, because if you don't address the resilience and ability of your brain to change, you cannot reinvent. It's biologically impossible. It has to do with what adrenaline does to our brain, to our vision, and to our hearing. We literally don't have enough oxygen in our brain. Our ears literally do not record sounds when we are in the moment of stress. So we cannot come up with a way to reinvent. We cannot find an exit when we are in high stress response. So resilience, finding back your central, getting off, dusting off, stopping the bleeding, and finding your center is the prerequisites for reinvention, because you simply biologically do not have enough oxygen to come up with an exit route and to find a way forward. So this is so intertwined that in all of our courses, before we touch Blue Ocean Strategy Canvas, before we touch our own tools, including the Stellar Adaptive Strategy Canvas and other tools we offer, the Titanic Syndrome Test, the Portfolio Canvas, before we touch any business speak and business tool, we actually always spend an extensive time on the biology of stress and biology of fear of change and how to rewire your brain and the exercises you need to do to make that happen.
I understand that from viscerally on a personal level. What about when you think about a company? What's the resilient company look like?
Well, the resilient company is the one that builds a system that is not allowing this to be a project. A project is treating reinvention like a wedding. It's something that happens rarely in our family. Hopefully, I don't know, there's some people who love to have many, many weddings. But generally speaking, even if you are on your fourth marriage, it's just 4 weddings in your lifetime. Hopefully, you have a long lifetime. So it's, one wedding, 20 years. And now treating reinvention like taking the shower. If I don't wash myself on a regular basis, I will begin to stink. If you don't wash your company on a regular basis, your product portfolio on a regular basis, your processes on a regular basis, you will begin to stink. And to wash it off, it cannot be a new adventure every time. When we take a shower in the morning, it's like we are learning the routine every time anew and don't know where to find soap or what to do with the towel. When we were kids, those of you, and I see your beautiful family pictures behind you, those of us who are parents, we remember when we were teaching our kids to wash themselves. That was a long process. But I see companies now treating every reinvention as if they're learning how to wash themselves from scratch, and I'm scratching my head. Every time there's a new disruption, digital, everyone creates a massive, oh my God, what do we do with digital? We need to adapt and reinvent to digital. Next, millennials. Oh my God, we need conference on millennials. Next, COVID-19. Oh my God, we need to adapt. It's all the same. If you build the process, the content doesn't matter because the traditional steps, anticipating change, designing change, implementing change, are about the same. There's small variations. There's a little bit of input that is needed. But once that skill is automatic, you will be a resilient company because it's part of your DNA. It's your habit. It's your automated response. You don't even remember how you brushed your teeth, but you brushed your teeth because it's a natural automated response built into the standard operation procedure. And that's what a resilient company is for me.
In your book, you talk about a few different companies that fit the different models of reinvention. What would be a good example that our listeners could just walk away with for a resilient company that's built a decent system?
Well, I always come back to one of the first loves of my life as a researcher. I lived for 9 years in Europe in a country called Slovenia. And because I was in this new environment and I was able to look at them with a fresh eye, I noticed so many gems that maybe I'm not having enough skill to appreciate in my common environment, the environment that is not new to me anymore. And one of those companies is Hydria, which won the most innovative company of the year in Europe more than once. This is the company that started its reinvention in 2004-2005, being a regional player in heating and cooling systems. Today, it's an international level, one of the best suppliers for some of the best automotive producers. And they are heavily in mobility, and some of the best companies in the world partner with Hydria around automotive parts and developing new technology, not just producing the parts, but developing new technology around which the future car is built. And this is the company that started with a very simple question. What do we know very well? And is there another industry that needs this knowledge? What do we know very, very well? And is there another industry that might need this competence? And they discovered, of course, that part of their good heating and cooling system is an electric motor. And in 2004, 2005, there was indeed an industry that needed competence around electric motor and didn't have enough. That was mobility. And from there, Hydria is continuously reinventing and build a culture that is all about business process innovation and really embedded in reinvention spirit into everything they do. And that's why I'm so happy to see their successes through the years, the new frontiers they're developing. Right before COVID, I was in Austria and had a chance to share a stage with the CEO of the company, Stock Celiac, who is a dear friend and big inspiration in my life. And when we were speaking, he was telling me how they're developing roads that are charging electric cars. So it's a wireless charging through the pavement. And they have their first 100 meters built to test how that would work. A completely different concept of where we will go.
That's amazing. And look, you'll find examples like this and others in the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook. A lot of what we touched on today is all in the book. I just want to encourage our listeners to check it out, to go find this book. First of all, you can't see it, obviously, because we're just talking about it, but this is a beautiful piece of work. Nadya can confirm that it's just loaded with Post-its. It's like a combination of a workbook, a beautifully designed, like what a PowerPoint should be if you have a PowerPoint in your hands. It's really very rich with information, tools, case studies, like exercises, and resource lists. Like every chapter ends with an illustrated library that just gives some examples of the books that you might want to take a look at, and other resources that are going to be useful to you in your reinvention journey. Look, I mean, this is a topic that, first of all, I love talking about. So I feel like I've spent the last hour really learning so much from you, Nadya. But our listeners really, this is only scratching the surface. So please, everybody, check out Nadya's website, the Reinvention Academy, which is learn2reinvent.com. The 2 is a numerical 2, so it's learn2reinvent.com. You can go to chiefreinventionofficer.com as well to learn all about Nadya. Check her out on LinkedIn. Her name, Nadya Zhexembayeva. I don't expect you to suddenly look for that, but it will be spelled properly in the episode title. Look, as we wind this down, Nadya, is there anything else that you want to say and leave our listeners with, as they kind of embark on their reinvention journey? I mean, we didn't even touch on how COVID really accelerated the path of and the opportunities, I think, for reinvention. But that's for another time. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, first, I thank you for very, very gracious and gentle hosting and floating of the conversation, because it's so hard to do. Those of us who have tried to host anything, we know how hard it is to have a flowing conversation that has
thank you.
Punchlines and all the benefits to the listeners. Second,
thank you.
For all of you who want to try this out, on that website, learn2reinvent.com, you will find tons of free resources. You can just download the PDF, including the 87-page preview of the book, where you will get a test on how ready you are for change, called Titanic Syndrome Test. And you will be able to test yourself or your company on your change readiness. So I would love to see your scores and comment on them. You can just tag me on LinkedIn. And finally, more on a philosophical note, I think we are in the middle of the most beautiful moment in our history, where we are given permission to let go of things we no longer want to be, to let go of things that no longer serve us, and to choose who do we want to be moving forward. That is the essence of reinvention, not to throw the baby with the bathwater, but to have the luxury of letting go of things that no longer help us while preserving the best of what we are and taking it to the next level. So I invite you to learn to look at disruption and change, not as an enemy, not God's punishment, not as somebody trying to get you, but as an opportunity to choose who you want to be. And I have no doubts that choice will lead you to the ultimate freedom.
Unbelievable final words from the reinvention guru, the Queen of Reinvention herself, Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva. And I just want to say that, based on those last words of wisdom, I choose reinvention. That's what I want to choose moving forward. I don't know what I want to let go of at the moment. I think I've let go of a lot, but I definitely want to choose to continue to reinvent. I hope that you are in our audience to continue to reinvent yourselves. Always check out Nadya's work to ground yourself and to give yourself some clues and hints and tools. That 87-page download is only 1/3 of the actual book. I'll let you know. It's like 260 pages roughly. Please check it out. Learn2reinvent.com. Chief Reinvention Officer.com, and Nadya Zhexembayeva. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan.